Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back. Today I'm going to be making Spanish tortilla with aioli. Jumping right into things, I'm going to start preheating what can only be described as an irresponsible amount of olive oil, about a cup. And that's going into a very well seasoned 10-inch cast iron skillet over about medium heat. Since this is a potato and egg dish, and potatoes and eggs both love to stick to cast iron, if yours isn't really well seasoned, or if you don't have a cast iron skillet, I would probably opt for non-stick here. While that gets going, I'm going to start peeling my potatoes. I've got a little over a pound of Yukon Golds here. If you don't have Yukon Golds, you can use russets for this, but I would probably avoid using something like a red potato. Waxier varieties of potatoes aren't going to break down and result in the same kind of creamy texture that we're after with this, so they're probably not the right choice here. But then again, if you've done it and you think it works great, let me know. Okay, now that my potatoes are peeled and rinsed, I'm going to go ahead and slice them up. To do that, I'm going to quarter these potatoes into basically really thick wedges, and then slice those wedges down into about 1/4-inch thick slices. The easiest way to do this, in my opinion, is to use a sharp knife and to just go fast. You can really get into a rhythm doing it this way, and you end up with slices that are just as even as they would be if you went slow and were really deliberate about it. Alright, my oil is heated up now, so it's time to start frying these potatoes. You really want to make sure your pan is hot enough at this point. You can see there my oil is smoking a little bit, so it should be good to go. But if your pan is too cold at this point, you will have greater problems with sticking. As I put these in, I'm also trying to separate the slices best I can with my hand so that they hit the oil one at a time. That way the slices don't stick to each other. So now I'm just going to hit those with a big pinch of salt, and then I'm going to give them a quick stir just to make sure that everything is evenly coated with that oil, and then I'm going to start working on my next ingredients, which is going to be an onion and a jalapeno. The onion is optional here, the jalapeno is super optional, but these are the additions that I like to make to my tortilla, so I'm going to add them. This is a medium-sized yellow onion, and I'm going to cut it into slices going from pole to pole, basically as thin as I can reasonably get it. And then for the jalapeno, I'm going to scoop out the ribs and seeds and then mince it finely. I really want to make sure I do a thorough job getting these ribs out because tortilla is pretty delicately flavored and any amount of spiciness is going to overpower the whole dish. I'm really just after the grassy fruitiness of the jalapeno here. Next, into a large mixing bowl, I'm going to crack 5 eggs and whisk them together with some salt and pepper, and then I'm going to set that aside for later. Alright, my potatoes are about halfway done, which means it's time to add my onions and jalapenos to the skillet now. The potatoes take longer to cook than any of the other vegetation here, so I like to give them a good head start. So now I'm going to mix all that in, breaking up the slices of onions as I go, and then I'm going to let this cook until everything is completely tender. So this is about 5 minutes later, and everything is fully cooked through at this point. So the first thing I'm going to do is siphon off a few tablespoons of this olive oil and reserve it. And then I'm going to take the rest of this mixture and dump it straight into my eggs. This move is going to help start setting the eggs now, so that later when they're in the pan, we won't have to fuss with it so much to make sure it gets cooked all the way through. So that's going to get a really thorough mix to get the heat evenly distributed throughout the eggs, and then I'm going to kind of reset my cast iron pan a little bit. You can see that despite my best efforts, I did have some sticking with the potatoes, and those stuck bits will cause the eggs to stick when they go in, so I'm going to really make sure to scrape all that off before doing anything else. So there, my pan is looking and feeling smooth again. So now I'm going to reintroduce that reserved olive oil from earlier and let that preheat for a couple minutes, swirling that around to make sure the pan gets nice and coated with that oil so that the eggs won't stick when they go in. If your pan is hot enough when you put the eggs in, you should see them set immediately around the edges. And here I'm just going around with a rubber spatula to make sure that I'm not having any sticking issues, and it feels good, it feels loose, so I think we're in the clear now. So now I'm going to throw the lid on to help the top set, and then I'm going to let it cook on this first side for a couple minutes. So a couple minutes later here, and I'm taking a peek at the bottom, and I can see it's a nice golden brown color, which means this thing's ready to flip. To do that, I'm going to take this over to the sink, and I'm going to use my pot lid for this, but you can use any large plate that doesn't have a tall lip around the edge. I'm going to make sure I'm holding my pan and lid really tightly up against each other, and then really quickly I'm going to invert the whole thing. Now just slide that back in the pan, and there you go, hard part done. So that goes back on the heat, and I'm going to rinse off this pot lid because I am going to be flipping this a couple more times, but none of them are quite as difficult now that both sides are going to be cooked. You can see the tortilla starting to take shape now. Swirling it around in the pan like this will help shore up the sides, as will repeated flipping. So this will just take another minute or two on the second side until it reaches the same color as the first side, and then it's ready to dismount. So that tortilla is done now. Normally you would serve this either room temperature or chilled. You can eat it hot if you want. It's still gonna taste great, but you do run a slightly greater risk of it falling apart on you. So I'm gonna let mine cool for a little while, and in the meantime, I'm gonna make some aioli. In this context, I'm using aioli to mean homemade mayonnaise flavored with garlic and olive oil, and that's gonna start with 1 whole egg in my measuring cup. To that, I'm gonna add about 1 teaspoon of Dijon mustard, and then the juice of this whole lemon. Normally, I would use the juice of half a lemon, but this one wasn't particularly juicy, so I'm just gonna use the whole thing. Now I'm going to grate 2 cloves of garlic on the microplane and add that. I'm going to add some salt and pepper, and then I'm going to add enough neutral oil to bring this whole concoction up to 1 1/4 cups in volume. Now here comes the fun part. I'm gonna take this immersion blender and put it into my measuring cup, and I'm gonna whiz this on high, and you're gonna see immediately the emulsion forming. Once most of the oil has been incorporated, I'm gonna start moving the head of the immersion blender up and down a little bit just to get everything at the top. And there you go, instant garlic mayonnaise. I love doing this because, one, it tastes way better than anything you can get at the store, and also every time you do it, it's like a fun little magic trick. The last step here to turn this into an aioli fit for our tortilla is to stir in some olive oil. I didn't add the olive oil up front because the blade of the immersion blender is way too aggressive for it. When you expose olive oil to something like that, it gets really bitter, so better to gently stir it in afterwards. I don't want to overwhelm the emulsion and risk breaking it, so I'm going to add the olive oil just a little bit at a time. I'm not really measuring it here, I'm just kind of adding it and then tasting it until I like the way it tastes. I think I ended up adding about 4 tablespoons. So now I'm gonna get a little bit of that into a serving dish here, and I'm gonna cut my tortilla up. I like to cut mine into 9 squares, but you can cut it up however you like. And with that, this Spanish tortilla is ready to enjoy. I think if there were ever a food that could be described as greater than the sum of its parts, this would be it. You can get a good look at the texture there, and the potatoes form this really dense, almost custardy interior that's really delicious and satisfying to eat. The tortilla itself is really rich and savory with all that oil and potato, and it's balanced out perfectly by the lemony aioli. To me, this is potatoes and eggs elevated to its highest possible form, and another reason I love it is that this whole thing is made of ingredients that, if you don't have them at home already, you can find at just about any supermarket nearby. You can eat this hot, cold, room temp for breakfast. You can make a salad with it and have it for dinner. There's really no inappropriate time to enjoy this treat. So I hope you give it a try sometime. If you do, let me know how it goes. Thanks.